Will I be the only one?
No, there's two other people.
Yeah, then I will take it. We're all to the same.
Yes.
But you don't have a strong minister of finance. Yes, well said. Yes, very good.
You can switch.
Yeah.
Merci, monsieur. Merci, Alain. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bean is missing. Okay. Nice to meet you. Okay, we may start. Okay, let's start. Good afternoon. Welcome for this last session, roundtable, which is supposed to be not the last one, but the best one. So thank you for all panelists to be part of this session on economic security and critical minerals. We have already covered since yesterday many issues about the supply, the demand, the taxation, and geoeconomics, but we have not really covered any topic regarding economic security. So to fill this gap, we have 5 outstanding panelists with us. Some of them have already had the opportunity to present some insights. To start, we have online Vahinala Raharinirina, former Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development in Madagascar. I don't know, Vahinala, if you hear us. Are you there? Yes, we...
Yes, I'm fine.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So I leave you the floor. So we have 1 hour 15. You're 5. You know the rule. And if we may have like 10 minutes for the discussion, that will be perfect. So if you can concentrate your talk in 10 to 12 minutes, that will be fantastic. And you tell me that you prefer to speak in French, so we have a translation. So I leave you the floor. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much, FERDI, CERDI, and the University of Oxford for this invitation on a very pertinent topic. So if you don't mind, I will switch to French. I know there is a translation. Je vais parler de la question de la gouvernance, de souveraineté et de développement local pour montrer un petit peu les enjeux pour le Sud global en général, mais surtout pour Madagascar. Et vous allez voir que Madagascar a des points communs sur l'ensemble du Sud global, mais aussi des enjeux qui lui sont spécifiques. Tout d'abord, je voudrais remettre un peu en contexte cette ruée mondiale pour les minerais critiques. Donc, c'est un phénomène que nous observons à Madagascar, que nous constatons ce contexte mondial, donc d'accès aux commodités et aux ressources. Et c'est exactement le même phénomène pour les minerais critiques. Il y a une demande, une hausse de la demande mondiale, même si on a eu une période de 3 années un petit peu compliquée. On voit bien qu'il y a une relance et cette géopolitique donc des minerais. Madagascar, comme la plupart des pays du Sud global qui sont donc en possession de ces minerais critiques, sont entre espoir et crainte aujourd'hui. Alors, je vais d'abord parler de l'espoir, de cet optimisme au sein des pays comme les nôtres. D'abord, l'espoir dans un contexte de baisse de l'aide publique mondiale. Je rappelle une baisse drastique de l'aide publique mondiale. On y voit un espoir. Ensuite, il y a aussi l'espoir d'une nouvelle relation qui est plus axée sur la diplomatie économique et notamment basée sur les transactions et ce schéma gagnant-gagnant qui fait rêver donc les pays comme Madagascar avec une relation que Madagascar, par exemple, souhaite équitable avec les pays acheteurs. Il y a aussi un autre espoir, c'est d'être enfin intégré ou inclus dans une chaîne de valeur mondiale avec de nouvelles règles. Il y a cet espoir d'une nouvelle règle au vu des enjeux géopolitiques. Madagascar pense par exemple que le rapport de force peut être bénéfique pour Madagascar avec cette présence des États-Unis, de la
with the
Chine,
presence of the US, China, Russia, Europe,
à travers cette course aux
through this
minerais,
scramble
critiques.
for critical minerals.
Toutefois, on voit
However,
aussi cette
we can also
donc,
see the fear,
d'abord, je voudrais revenir sur la,
and I want to go back, first of all, to the hope,
cette question de nouvelles
to that
relations.
question
Il y a
of
aussi
new
l'espoir d'une
relations,
possibilité
but there's a
de
hope
croissance économique
of having
sur
economic
un temps
growth
plus lent et surtout
over
de
a
réajuster
longer
la
period and
trajectoire
to
de
readjust
développement.
the development
Je
trajectory.
rappelle que
I'd like to remind you
Madagascar
that
fait partie
Madagascar is one of
des pays classés
the countries ranked
pays moins avancés,
as
quatrième
least
plus
well
pauvre du monde.
advanced, one of the poorest in the world.
La croissance
It's
économique
difficult to
sur
have
un
economic
temps
growth
long. Il y a toujours
over the long
ces
term.
périodes cycliques
There are
de
always
crise
these
à
cyclical
Madagascar. Et donc, il y a
periods
cet
of
espoir
crisis
que,
in Madagascar. So there is a
ce
hope, therefore,
positionnement de
that with
pays
this
parmi les
position
fournisseurs de
as a
minerais
country
critiques,
that provides
Madagascar
critical
peut
minerals,
enfin
Madagascar
stabiliser
can
sa
stabilize
trajectoire. Alors,
its
sur les craintes, bien
trajectory.
évidemment,
Among the fears, however,
d'une partie de
there
l'opinion
is
publique
one
sur
of public
notre
opinion
capacité
about our
à
ability to
assumer ces négociations qui
assume
semblent
these
assez
negotiations
complexes au
that seem
regard de
quite
ce qui se passe
complex in light
aujourd'hui,
of what's
notamment
going on.
l'exemple particulier
In particular,
des
the
négociations avec les
specific
États-Unis
example with
sur
the of
les
negotiations
Doha.
with the US
Il y a également
and
une
Doha
crainte
Accords.
sur le choix de
There's
travailler
also a
avec
fear
l'Est
about working
ou
with the
avec
East
l'Ouest. Et donc ça, on le voit
or
vraiment.
the
L'opinion
East, the
publique
East or the
peut se
West. In
diviser en
fact, we
deux.
can see the public
Même
opinion
dans
is
le
almost
monde
divided in
académique,
two.
le secteur
Even in
privé,
academia,
il se
even
pose la
in the
question. Est-ce que
private sector, we are
Madagascar
asking
devrait
ourselves, should Madagascar
travailler
work
exclusivement avec les
exclusively
États-Unis et continuer
with the
avec
US,
l'Europe
continue with Europe,
ou plutôt
or
s'ouvrir
rather
à l'Est
open up to the
et
East?
la position de Madagascar
And the
jusqu'ici a
position
été
of
de dire
Madagascar has
nous devons
been to
travailler
date
avec
that we
tout
should
le
work
monde
with everyone and focus, therefore, on the country's interests, depending on what these major power blocks can offer or what the emerging nations can offer. But perhaps the greatest fear is social unrest and ecological trends that are very present in Madagascar. They are claiming that we should not exploit our mining resources to have a decarbonized economy and to have green growth, inclusive growth, and return. And this is where Madagascar has had a lot to do about this fear of a return or failure to return for the country's economic actors. With this, Madagascar has really adopted a position for some years now as a country that opens up to direct foreign investment to countries that wish to support Madagascar and operate these critical or exploit these critical minerals. And unfortunately, the country has not had the economic boom that was expected, but for various reasons, obviously. Firstly, the issue of governance, corruption. We all recall the events 3 years ago with arrests of senior civil servants that had been involved in attempted corruption, which gave a very poor image of Madagascar, hence the difficulty of positioning the country. Then afterwards, the mining facilities that were considered obsolete, that were dating from 1989, with forecasts for 2025, where, of course, there's a law, the major mining investment that is being finalized as I speak. We have this strong position of a civil society interested in the environment, which Madagascar would deviate from its trajectory, where the country contributes to the adaptation and to the question of climate solutions, even though we are aware that these critical minerals do contribute to the energy transition on a global level. Madagascar, it has to be said, has benefited from these resources because the mining sector accounts for 5% of GDP and some 60,000 jobs. That was an assessment made by the new mining minister, as you know, Madagascar, after the events in September, adopted a transitional government. We're talking about overhauling the country, and as part of this, the mining sector and critical minerals were part of those things that will be rethought. There is a position of a new government on these issues with the idea that Madagascar should be in the front lines of the suppliers of critical minerals. Here we're talking about intermediary minerals and critical minerals as raw materials. Over this transitional period, there is the issue of sovereignty. In other words, Madagascar will take possession of the governance of its resources to offset this issue of help or reducing public aid or the reduction of debts from concessions that raise issues for our country. The next point I wish to share is the place of Madagascar. I'd like to remind you that Madagascar is the number 2 producer of graphite behind China, followed by Mozambique and Brazil. There is a 150,000 concentrate capacity per year with direct foreign investment. It has been there, that has been using 17,000 tons per year since 2023. So a major opportunity opening up for Madagascar. Everything to do with nickel and cobalt that have contributed in the last decade to softening the shock of various economic recessions, including the COVID period and the conflicts we've experienced, which have really impacted the Madagascar economy. Not only in terms of this, but in terms of local economy, we've seen there are regions that have benefited from the presence of major mining projects, the 2 major ones, and also intermediary ones that are also there. we have a project that is well known today in Bestouillat that has been taken over by the Americans, that was before, above all, a project launched by the Australians who handed over to the Americans, and necessarily that the issue of the Bestouillat mines should have ilmenite and other substances. It's part of the balance of the negotiations. There's textiles, there's also vanilla, but also critical minerals in southern Madagascar, which are part of the negotiations that are on the table with a background of a degree of opposition by political classes, but also from civil society that is concerned that next to these sites nearby there are forests and there's biodiversity that is endemic to southern Madagascar. The final point I wish to share with you, for me, it's really an outlook that we have for Madagascar, which is divided, torn between this desire to recover and redress its economic trajectory through indigenous growth and using its resources, but with new criteria, in particular business ethics, responsibility, corporate social responsibility, and above all, ESG criteria that are highlighted. And these new institutional frameworks should be there, and the law on major mining investment. So Madagascar is a genuine crossroads between going really in this direction, and how the government will manage its opposition that is more or less audible and visible, that would like Madagascar to go into green growth, more into green and blue economies. I hope I wasn't too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vahinala, to your introduction for this panel. I suggest that we move to the second panelist, and we will pick up question of comments at the end of that session. So now, Grégoire Jean from Imerys. I will leave you the floor to introduce Imerys for those of you who do not, and I don't know, who and what is the job of Imerys. So I leave you the floor. You have a presentation, so you the same time for you, 12 to 15 minutes. Yeah. And important, Grégoire has to leave at 4:45, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so please.
I will take less time than 12 minutes, I suppose. I will be very quick. So I'm working I'm the director of R&D for Imerys lithium activities. Imerys is an industrial mineral company, so we are basically mining industrial minerals such as calcium carbonate, bentonite, wollastonite, talc, and so on. And recently, like in 2020, we decided to have a deeper look at a lithium opportunity below one of our kaolin quarry in Echassier. So it's like 40 kilometers from here in the Allier department. And there is lithium. So now the project, which is called Emily, is on the way to be the first French lithium mine. And we have another project in the UK in a similar situation, a lithium which is in a granite hosted by Mica. These are details. We don't care much. I will present very quickly the project, and then I thought it was next slide, but no. Okay. Very quickly to put in perspective my last slides, which are more on the topic. So basically, you know that lithium is a critical component for European resilience, independence. As you see, the integrated supply that are all the announced projects are not even going to cover half the need in 2030, whatever it is. And we know that not all the projects are going to see the light. Our ambition at Emily is to be probably a major player in Europe, not in the world. As you see, you have one project which is Emily, and another project which is British Lithium. It is also Imerys. And with these two projects, we might be the first lithium producer in Europe going in 2030. One of the main topic, and I will build on that later on, is that we want to develop a responsible mine. So we are on an existing asset, which is very important. We know the biodiversity, and we want to back our development on the IRMA standard, Initiative for Responsible Mining Alliance, which has very strong, let's say, constraints and criteria on all ESG components, environmental, social, and so on, beyond even regulation which exists in the EU. And that led to structuring choices. So we're going to do an underground mine, so which limits the footprint, I don't know what it is, why it is in French. Okay, the noise. We're going to transport by pipeline and then by rail, lower the CO2, and avoid a lot of traffic. We will do a conversion into an old industrial site. So all of this is to lower the impact on the environment. And the water is very important. It is, I suppose, the topic for the next 50 years. A reduced water consumption with a lot of recycled loops and so on. So, and we're going to use a lot of new technologies to avoid wasting water. But these structural choices, they will have an impact. So if we talk back on the topic on industrial resilience, it's the robustness of the whole value chain. So from raw material to end products, mines, chemicals, polymers, and so on. Here, obviously, we're going to focus more on mines, but we have to understand that sometimes there is a weak link. The weak link might not be the mine. It may be the refining, for instance. In our case, the project is an integrated project. We go from mine to lithium salt. So we refine the lithium. It's not only a mining project, but there are other steps between us and, in that case, the car makers. Obviously, there are a lot of... Usually, the supply criteria are very clear. You have multiple suppliers, multiple countries, if you can, and a long-term stability of the supply. And we'll see in the mining industry and the new critical mineral, it's very difficult to get all of this together. And we need to understand the risk. I mean, the automakers in that case, but all the user and product users, they need to understand the risk. Very often, the risk is very down the supply chain. That some of the end product manufacturers, they just realize that they are very exposed to some critical minerals because they have been asking their tier 1 suppliers, everything was fine. Tier 2, everything was fine, but in fact, tier 3, yes, we're relying on one supplier or two suppliers which are relying on the same mine, for instance. Okay. And understanding what is the weakest link is the key for the industry. Responsible supply chain, what does it mean? There is no single definition. So obviously we share some comments. There are some elements which are all the same, such as environment regulations, workers' conditions, could be also human rights. And beyond that, also the social acceptance. The acceptance for creating, developing new mines is not something which is regulated. It's the feeling of the people on site. Then there is also a drive for going to responsible supply chain. The first one I just talked about is the regulation. This is a drive. You need to do it because you have no other choice. There is the public pressure, so the image of the companies, and maybe also sometimes a buyer pressure. So is the customer is going to require for you to adhere to some standards or to be responsible or not? And that's a key question, because at some point someone needs to pay for increasing the sustainability or the responsibility of the supply chain. I will focus on the raw material, and to increase resilience, we need to go as far as we can, as much as we can, local or domestic. Why? Because first, offtake agreements that you can get for 5, sometimes even 10 years, they're not going to last long. Meaning you can't rely on that. Political shifts, some major economical shifts as well, they can put all of this to the side, and if you lack the access to the resource, the whole supply chain can crumble. So you need to be very close to have a significant share of your supply coming from local/domestic production. A consequence, if you're in a European country, you have an increased responsibility in your supply, because embedded into the production in EU are very high standards for environmental aspects, residue management, water management, so intake, offtake, effluents, and so on, and biodiversity. You have also a high standard in workers' rights, social rights, and so on, obviously, high level of living, and also beyond regulation that exists everywhere, but in the EU it's even more, I would say, acute, is the social acceptance. The consequences, I will talk a bit about the Emily project. You saw the structuring choices. An underground mine, that costs a lot. A highway transport, you need to create the highway station. There is a line, but the station does not exist. Dry stack tailings, so it's much less dangerous than wet tailings, with tailing dams that can break and flood entire areas and kill people, but it's increased cost. Water recycling as well, it's technological choices that you put into place. So there are economical consequences, either on OPEX, in particular the effluent treatment, they're costly, liquid, solid, or gas emission. We are also talking about the refining. And there is also CapEx increase. It's more on the equipment and obviously the infrastructures. And who pays for that? And that's a very important point, because if we want to do, yes, we want resilience and we want responsibility, we need to pay for that. Either it's a reduced margin for the end product manufacturer, it takes the cost for him, okay? Will it work? It's not very clear when the industry is struggling with high prices, such as the car maker industry. Is it the public? For the moment, the pressure is not translating into real willingness to accept a price increase. So public, they want higher responsibility for everything, not only the mine, but all the supply chain, but at the same cost. So there is something which is not possible. Another way is maybe to level the fields. So tariffs, or import taxes, to level the fields between players, and not countries, but players which are trying to get some very high degree of responsible mining and refining, and others which are not playing with the same rules. And maybe even go to banning some suppliers to sell into some countries based on auditable criteria and norms. And at the moment, the most important parameter is the CapEx, because there have been a lot of discussion today about the fact that there are some fluctuation, and when the price is soaring, there are some things like unrest, issues, increase or decrease of wealth in the region which are producing. But the fluctuation in the market are putting pressure as well on the CapEx, the investment. You don't invest in a mine, which is very, very CapEx intensive, if you believe that sometimes the lithium price, in the case of lithium, can go very down. The lithium was almost 80 euro per kilogram 2 to 3 years ago. Now it went as low as, when I say lithium, it's lithium carbonate, almost as low as 8 euro per kilogram. We are back to 10, more or less. But when you go from 80 to 8, divided by 10, and when you go to see a bank and say, I need 1, 2, 3 billion for my project, which is going to be in 2030, 35, but I need the money now, or I will need the money in 2 years, you're going to say, wait, what is going to be the price? You don't know. So the instability is putting also a pressure on that. And when you put the additional pressure on being responsible, so additional capex for developing an underground mine, putting new infrastructure and so on, getting the money is very difficult. And there are some ways to do it, and some countries did it, in particular China. Okay, first now they are mastering the supply chain, so they can play with that. But before they did that, they did some investment. The thing is that the cost, they paid for that. If there were some issues, the state was there for that. It was a state plan. Okay, so here we are playing a field for the moment. The players like Imerys, which is a very small mining players, but all the majors, they are playing with the Western rules where they are supporting all the risks. In the case of some initiatives where the state is coming in, if you have a sudden downturn, the state is here and you're not killing your company. So I think that this is important, and if also obviously we don't accommodate, at least for the responsible part, with an adjustment in the capex risk, we are offsetting even further the difference between countries or players that want to do the responsible things compared to others which are not doing it. And I think that's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Grégoire. Now I'll leave you the floor, Bin, about China and COP30. You want to stay on your seat?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for having an opportunity to join the panel. Since I just came from Brazil, Belém, so I just want to talk about the China's position in COP30 and what's implications for critical mineral policy in China in the future. Yes, in Berlin, I think the COP30, probably most of you know the climate conference, right? in this conference, implementation is become the heart of global climate governance. Because previously, like in the past 10 years, everybody wants to raise ambitions, but now everything actually is in place, but now we need more acceleration for implementation. So that's why we call the next 10 years will be implementation. And China, for sure, is shaping that implementation in the real economy, although they don't want to show in politics. Why I say that? Because when I first landed in Berlin, I took a Uber to my hotel, and the BYD come. So I'm actually very surprised, because Berlin is I can't say it's a very small city, but it's not big city. Also far away from like São Paulo and the capital of Brazil. But also I talked to the drivers. The driver told me that like now for the Ubers, they told me like more than 50% are BYD electric cars. Also they told me a lot of Chinese companies are doing business there. So that's why I'm saying China is really shaping the real economy in developing countries, like in Brazil. They also told me like this will be the driving force for transportation electrification in Brazil. So that's why I can really feel the impact of Chinese EV companies in Brazil. So here I want to just show you 3 observations on China's evolving climate rules and what that means for critical minerals governance. So the first is that China is a climate leader in practice, but cautious in politics, because China still stick to the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. And for example, in climate finance, China still insists like the developed countries should provide the climate finance first. That's the precondition for the developing countries to increase the NDC ambition. But in the non-negotiation space, for example, like in China Pavilion, because we know each country will have their own pavilions. And the China Pavilion in 2 weeks, full of people. So many people, because China's pavilion is also just on the entrance to the meeting place. So that's why there's so many people crowded in the China Pavilion. Also in the pavilion, like Chinese EV companies like BYD and other EV cars, and also the China Petroleum companies, also they also express very interested about their business or their future operation in Brazil or in Latin Americans. So that's a sign, and lots of people come to China Pavilion to ask about whether we can cooperate, not just like academics, but also business and other kind of cooperation between Brazil and China. So that's why I can say there is a growing gap between China's real-world influence and its political caution. And the world increasingly expects China to serve as a system co-architect, not just a cautious participant. So that's the first observation. The second one is, now China's priorities, three aspects. The first one is right direction, which means low carbon transition. The second one is implementation, and the third one is openness. So first, we should stay in the right direction. So that's what I also mentioned in my presentation in the morning, because China's carbon neutrality already was part of the national strategy. So China for sure will go ahead with this direction. The second one is focus on concrete actions. So that's because now actually in my institute we have a cooperation with EU Commission, and starting from last year we have lots of dialogues between each other. And the EU Commission always try to persuade China to increase their ambitions like NDCs. But China always say, in such a current context, why even you have high ambition, but you can't implement? How can we do that? So China always say we should have implementation on the ground first. Then we can make progress more and more. So that's kind of the gap between like EU and in China. I mean, probably both are very important, but I think the current time, implementation, we need more actions. The third one is deeper openness and cooperation. I think that's the very important goals for China, because trade protectionism is the first time China used COP30 to elevate trade items into the core decision text for the first time. So that China really shows its significant new market of influence, because also China had closed-door negotiations for the trade and the climate. And the trade, for sure, which means a lot for the critical minerals, because as we just mentioned a lot, trade protectionism will slowing down the global transition path. So that's why China wants related trade with climate governance together. So I think that's the goal of China, because if you want to have trade restrictions, which means we'll slow the global decarbonization. So the last point is China wants economic fairness, but is wary of new scrutiny, because here the first time in this COP, they also have some discussion for critical minerals, but China and some other countries just blocked the words on like what's the external scrutiny of by extracting minerals in other countries. So China doesn't like this kind of words, which means China is very cautious about this. Probably will be used another geopolitical tools to impose restrictions for China's companies in the third country for operating like critical minerals operation. Another point I want to make is also China won't involve in the TFF raised by the Brazil government, probably due to like conditionality, and also it is operated by the World Bank. So that's another case that China insists that the developed country should provide climate finance first. Okay, so what's the implications for the critical minerals and the global supply chain governance? So I think we have 4 implications. The first one, China sees mineral supply chains as part of its climate trade mandate. So China will resist any policy that excludes its companies from global clean tech markets. The second one is China wants rules that respect global south development. China will push to link mineral governance with industrial upgrading in resource-abundant countries. The third one is trust gaps persist. China values that mineral governance framework are becoming the new geopolitical tools by Western countries. The last point is rivalry and the transition must be decoupled. So China wants to show you, because you want China to be the leader, but at the same time, you have restrictions for the China's renewable exports, imports. So that's contradictory. So that's why China wants rivalry and transition be decoupled. So for the ways or looking ahead, how can we still proceed? So I think we have 3 points. The first one is aligned sustainability and the traceability standards. I think that's really important. The second one is shared incentives for host country development. So this we also talk about a lot with US counterparts. Although now US and China is really hard to work together directly, but whether we can still work together on the third country. Because for example, like US previously have like just transition partnership with South Africa, like also lots of Southeast countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, but also China invests a lot in those countries too. So we are talking about the possibility whether we can still provide some assistance together to these countries to make it more economically efficient. But yeah, some people argue that it's also impossible, but some others also agree that possibility. So we are still looking for that. The third one is risk governance. So narrow and predictable export controls avoid collateral damage to the climate transitions. So the last point I want to mention is that, yes, just like what I mentioned today in my morning talk, I think critical minerals and the clean tech trade are now the lifelines for global climate actions. So I think the cooperation is the only way. They remain strong enough to deliver the transition. Okay, thank you. I will stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Now we move to you, Per Magnus. You have already. Yes, you have present.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Please.
Okay, yeah, I will actually continue a little where I left yesterday, because where I left yesterday was when I was going to talk a little about how much the supply chain is dominated by our friend from China here. So I'll just give you some numbers on that, and then we can discuss the implications of that. So I will just browse quickly through what you saw more or less yesterday, where I talked about the actual forecasts of battery minerals and magnet rare earth. And I also said yesterday that many of you are looking at IEA, but IEA, they claim themselves that they don't do forecasting, but we do. So that is it's different type of projections, because we actually do a lot of research with the industry and the cost trends. So our forecast is what is really going on in the industry, and we're taking into account all the plans going forward. Also recycling. No, this is actually coming from our friends in IEA. They made a fantastic report earlier this year on critical minerals. And what they are showing us here is on the refining concentration of the critical energy minerals. And we see that they have looked also at the ownership. So what is interesting is that, yes, you see it's very red on graphite and rare earth. The only area where the energy minerals are not mined mostly in China is nickel in Indonesia, but there actually China owns 2/3 of the mines. So on the ownership dimension, China has like 2/3 to 90% of the ownership of the metals refining side for all these critical energy minerals. This is just you. I think you know more about the periodic system than myself, but it was just to place the magnet rare earth in this periodic system. But of course, within energy applications, normally we always add a little of the heavy rare earth, but it is of course In wind turbines offshore with 10 tons of permanent magnets, it's actually 3 tons of neodymium in these largest magnets. It's actually massive, quite impressive. This is a chart that is a little seen from US. It gives a good overview of rare earth applied in the 3 sectors: energy, defense, and technology. And here we have looked at the criticality seen from a US point of view, especially on the defense side. And you see that 100% of the rare earth minerals that goes into some of these critical rare earth for defense, 100% is imported into US. And here our consultants, they have divided the world in those supply countries that are friendly and those who are less friendly. And you see that China, they control almost everything that goes into defense. And also and those who can actually complement China on the rare earth side is Japan, but it's actually very small shares of the total supply that can be. I will go into the trade a little later. And here we are looking at the value chain of rare earth mining. And you see that actually the reserves, the ownership of the reserves, China owns 1/3. But when you get to production, China owns 2/3 of the global production of rare earth. And when we come to processing, the share of China increases gradually up to 92% of the magnet production. So 92% of all the permanent magnets, they are produced in China. And then looking a little at the trade flows. First of all, these permanent magnets, it is something like $2 billion of worth of permanent magnets that goes out from China to Europe and United States. It's not a large trading volume, $2 billion a year. It's the same amount we have on oil trade for one day. So this is not a large trade. So I think it's, but if you look at where you have some kind of diversification here, you see Myanmar, they're actually exporting 70, this is kiloton, it's not million ton, it's kilotons to China. So that is the main diversification that happens, is mining in Myanmar and refining in China. You see there are 3 refining sectors. These stars is China, Japan, and Malaysia, a little in Malaysia. Now, I just looked a little at a very kind of simplified way of looking at whether minerals for energy purposes are critical or not. And then I've looked at the mining concentration, the refining concentration, and we looked at that. We have looked at demand growth, and we looked at that yesterday. The supply limitations and recycling. What is the potential for recycling? What is the potential for new technology? What is the share of these minerals in the end cost? And what is the share of energy in the total demand for these minerals? And then, of course, growth of other usage. And then we came to a conclusion that, and especially because of this change from nickel-based to iron-based, nickel, manganese is not very critical. Cobalt is still relatively critical, but it's really the magnet rare earth that seems to be the most critical part for the energy sector, also because the demand from defense sector is going to increase going forward. And to take it to the policy side, I would say that, yes, this dominance of China, within energy, it is something that we more or less have to accept in Europe because climate change is very important. And if we started to somewhat slow the flow of equipment, and I talked about minerals, but on the equipment side, China has even larger dominance on solar cells, on wind turbines now. So Europe will really have to just welcome these imports from China. While in US, the situation is quite different because climate change is not extremely important. So I don't think that they look at this China dominance as something that is extremely critical either. So that is just a very simple summary of how I see this going forward, and we can talk about this in some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Per Magnus. Now, Thiemo, for the last presentation. 10 minutes is okay for you?
More than enough. So it would be lovely if I can actually extend my comments on the presentation yesterday, because it was a bit cut short. Sorry, I need to move it a bit closer, because it sort of would be doubling down actually on these points. I'm not sure I emailed Bulbul, but I'm not sure whether she got my email about the slides. Anyways, basically yesterday, I highlighted how we use AI to generate a production side view of the economy. And that allows us to look at how certain goods, materials are embedded in the value chains. And the value chains are obviously globally organized between nations, but also within nations. And this is where right now we have an aggravation in the system of governance around the global trading system. I think for me the most important comment that I want to make here is that this system has been under stress for a long, long time, because there is a perception that players like China has maintained the benefits of being outside the WTO in terms of market access, in terms of the structure of the market access conditions, while actually enjoying the benefits from being inside. And that is sort of what players in Europe and the US contest as actually having allowed China to build that dominant role in and around rare earth mining. So there's an established literature in economics that sort of highlights how essentially the pivot of the import taxes and export taxes that have been levied. I mean, yesterday we talked about the VAT and so the ability of reclaiming VAT. It basically replicates that structure of creating incentives to import rare earth resources and sort of process the refining, that inversion of the value chain, so to say, was incentivized, right? In a way that players in Europe and the US perceived that this was not compliant with the system of governance of global trade around goods. We now enter a world where this dependence, which is the world is in a dilemma, because we need to actually, tap into Chinese manufacturing prowess to, build out the green transition. It's an existential need. If you're in the UK, it's a very obvious thing that if the North Atlantic current collapses, that's actually an existential risk for us in Europe. And so Europe is sort of finding itself in that sort of very strange position, being squeezed between the US and China. Because obviously the Chinese interests are to tap into that market, and the US interests are to align their perceived allies, and that's now playing out in the service sector domain through the competition in and around artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence itself can significantly raise the demand for critical minerals through the chips. And that has then escalated. I'm sort of giving just a summary, so to say, of how I see it, with the withholding of chips that are American designed, Taiwanese produced, and sort of then globally deployed, which then China countered through the threats around restricting access to essentially refined minerals, right? Both of them actually center around actually deploying tools of statecraft that require auditability of the end use. So that's fundamentally what the challenge is, right? China is afraid, America is afraid that the technology, GPUs, are used to build autonomous weapon systems that can be deployed in the battlefield, where obviously Chinese manufacturing prowess could scale that in a way that probably Europe and the US couldn't, thereby giving it an advantage in a kinetic escalation, right? And that's sort of the demand. That's why, you know, the US is withholding these chips or sort of putting up, because they want to make sure that the underlying end use is not basically boosting military capabilities. In the same way that China is withholding access to critical minerals, because on the same side, you know, these critical minerals can be used for green goods, but also for military goods. And that is sort of the dilemma. But within that dilemma, there's also a potential pathway to a solution, which to me involves, again, innovation in the service sector domain around, I mean, this is where we can talk about, you know, the role of digital money or the digital transformation of the tax infrastructure that is happening in and around Europe, the G20 nations, and potentially in the US through stable coins. Because technically that creates a digital currency where essentially we have an automatic, you know, ledger and a full flow of transactions. Meaning that if you have an invoice level VAT, that would be sort of the old school tax equivalent, you end up, every node that is engaging in trade, you'll have an end-to-end traceability of the flow of goods and services in and through the economy. Which actually, you know, if there's trust, or if one can build up trust in the authenticity and the ability that your digital tax system is working well, which can be validated through, you know, audit trails, countries can actually share information about the compliance status without sharing the underlying data. So countries can authenticate or share information about a latent state, a state that's unknown. Does this good involve inputs that have been derived from cleared forest, right? That's a very big topic vis-a-vis Brazil around deforestation and beef that's sort of imported. We can actually validate that state without sharing the underlying sensitive microdata around the production process through zero-knowledge proofs. And so technically, the technology exists. And you know, the big tension I sense is between countries is just what is the underlying governance around you know, that technology? Is it sort of operating on private sector rails, or is it operating through a public sector you know, tax infrastructure like the G20 has mostly agreed on? And in the US, that tax infrastructure simply doesn't exist. And that's why they're pushing very aggressively in and around stablecoins as a potential tool to build that same visibility on supply chain transparency. But technically, to me, the technology to actually build trust or rebuild trust is there. Meaning that we can engage in the trade that globally we need in a way that you know, we can ensure that the security or the perceived security needs of the two behemoths globally are secured without sort of, you know, causing the planet to be the collateral damage. Right now, I'm not so sure where the sort of tensions are on this, because in terms of the US, there's an aggressive build out on that digital finance infrastructure. Within the G20, the build out of, I mean, invoice level VAT data, I will have probably the pleasure to work with Chinese invoice level VAT data, is seemingly you know, developing very rapidly. And in Europe, we're also building these rails. So technically, all the necessary conditions to, let's say, remove the sting out of the escalation that is happening is sort of in the works. And to me, this is actually the most important part. Of course, when we think about then the broader implications for the service sector part of the economy, we have a massive revolution. Because when we actually move to full-on digital payment system, a digital tax system, most of the service sector is gone. You know, and that is something that, you know, I sense European players might be very sensitive or concerned about, because we have, you know, a big chunk of the economy is services. Services tend to be locally consumed, locally produced, and if anything, the players that would lose out from a digitization or a building out of the digital finance infrastructure, as well as the public sector tax-based infrastructure, would be licensed occupation holders, would be accountants, would be lawyers, would be much of what makes up typically a non-tradable but very important domestic service industry. And so that is, again, something that could, from a perspective of Europe and the US, embracing these technologies could imply a strategic vulnerability vis-a-vis China, because China is in the business. I mean, there's an article, I think, yesterday or today in the FT on this, where China is wanting to trade with the rest of the world, but actually not seeming to realize that trade is a two-way street, right? That it's not just about dominating production in all domains, but if you want to sell something, you also have to buy something, because otherwise there's no trading system that's left. And that's why there's sort of this catch-22 that we kind of have globally, because we need to actually embrace this technology to actually rebuild trust, build either the public sector data infrastructure around digital invoice level VAT, and or the private-led one, which is the direction that the Americans seem to be pursuing. That helps us build the trust so that we can keep the goods flowing without sort of there being concerns around security, right? That would also enable Europe to build its own critical mineral supply chain, benefiting directly, primarily, for the benefit of the security domain, right? Where pricing tends to be very, not necessarily market-based, meaning that it doesn't come in under the remit of the WTO, because there's all of the security exemptions around governance, around trade. But we find ourselves in a situation where embracing that technological change might imply a huge rebalancing of the economies in Europe and the US in particular, that has a very pesky political economy around it, because licensed occupation holders are incredibly politically represented in parliaments. And so that's sort of the dilemma that I see. And I think it would be very interesting to brainstorm a little bit about the solutions or potential avenues for solving this, because we need to get this sorted, Otherwise, it's not just a risk shock, it's a massive uncertainty shock. That I think, in and around climate change, we need to get this sorted. Anyways, I'll leave it here. So that was just some high-level reflections. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thiemo. So we have like 10 minutes maximum for discussion, collecting comments, question. I see Jim one. The first, we have also one online question that I will keep for the last minute. Yes, Jim.
Thanks. So this is reacting a bit to Thiemo's points, but maybe it's a question to everyone. So kind of the question is, what's it going to look like in 10 years? Are we going to be sat here having the same kind of conversation or not? And Thiemo put forward saying the technology is there to sort of have this traceability sort of solution to some of these problems, to reassure the potential adversaries about traceability and the end use of these technologies as well. And on the one hand, we have the GPUs, and on the other hand, we have the rare earth elements, and we're very focused on those. But is there an alternative scenario where, I don't know, the US underwrite a new rare earth mine and figure out the technology of the processing, and some of the other critical minerals, some more processing springs up and gets underwritten by the West outside of China, and then we all just go home and we stop worrying about this stuff. That, a lot of the other minerals, maybe there's going to be a bit more diversification of supply, a bit more diversification of processing, but they're not quite as sort of inelastic in a demand sense and in a kind of national security sense. And that'll sort of get muddled out. And then the really sort of existential stuff, they'll underwrite and figure out. And maybe there won't be a need for this kind of technology to be used. Maybe we're only talking about sort of a very small fraction of global trade that is really sensitive. And so this is maybe a challenge to sort of like, how much do you think we're still going to be worrying about this stuff in 10 years, and how much of this will just sort of fix itself?
Maybe I was not the person answering that we are expecting to. I will give you one little story about tantalum that you know is produced in particular a lot in RDC. It happens that Imerys, as a byproduct, is producing tantalum at HCR, the only tantalum producer in Europe. We are shipping that to Brazil because there is no refining in Europe. Tantalum concentrate are radioactive. So what happens on the market? Half to 3/3 of the tantalum which is shipped everywhere in the world is shipped as sand, because you don't want to worry with radioactive material. Okay. You have also Malaysia is a strong producer of tantalum. They have only very few mines, but they are buying sand from RDC. Yes. And Rwanda has become in 2 years a major producer of tantalum, when suddenly tantalum became under scrutiny because of conflict. What I mean is that you can put all the digital, whatever you mean, if you are not on the boots on the ground to see if a mine can produce that amount of whatever, tantalum in that case, rare earths, and so on, you don't know where it's coming from. And at the end, you sell to someone which is doing like, okay, doing some tantalum iron alloys, fine. But in fact, it's not true. They're receiving the tantalum, using a bit to do some alloys, and the rest are just giving it to the neighbors, which is doing semiconductors. You don't know that. You trace down to the alloy manufacturers, not to the semiconductor one. So honestly, I don't believe one way it's going to change. Not by putting traceability. You're not going, because if you want to hide something, you hide it. Except if you allow, and I don't see any country doing that, allowing people having the right to enter and see if indeed the material is produced here and used there. And since I don't see anywhere the policies going there, I don't see the situation changing because of traceability. We can trace very well. We can change a lot of things. There will be some major changes into the service world, that's for sure. But as for the starting point and end point, I don't believe that, because you have the availability to go off the grid whenever you want. In particular, where you're in a country, and suddenly you do the policy, and you can hide things. You can put things off the ground, in particular if it's defense industry. And on top of that, if you were to accept the complete traceability, you would give, even if you don't know exactly what it is used for, you would understand what is the proportion of a mineral going into some industry, and you can't afford to do that. So for the major, more critical elements, everything is hidden, and all the numbers you believe are not the real numbers which are used. And it's true for tantalum, beryllium. You have some of the rare earths. We are talking about dysprosium for magnet, but some are even more important for the defense industry, and we don't focus on that. So sometimes, for instance, yttrium, which is one of the non-rare earths, the non-lanthanide rare earths, is very, very important, and we don't talk about it very much. So unfortunately, I don't see anything going forward in 10 years, because you want to hide, you can. And it's already happening. And everybody in the tantalum industry knows that. Nobody is doing it. I mean, there is no policy to forbid people sending radioactive material. They do it. I mean, Kazakhstan accepts tantalum, very radioactive tantalum concentrate, but no class 7. Class 7 is transport for radioactive material. No class 7, please. Okay, fine. So we don't do business with them because we are following the rules, but it means that's the way a very critical and small volume, and iron is not the same, but small volume production is going currently. It's going to stay the same, I think. Personal opinion, huh?
It's what we call an empirical evidence. Any other or reaction from any of you, or other comment, question? So maybe to conclude, a very quick question. Sorry, please.
Yeah, I just want to ask a question regarding the exploitation of critical minerals, especially in DRC. Can you talk a bit about the implication of multinational companies here in exploiting, these minerals at some extent? Because we know that Rwanda is not producing these raw minerals, as you said, tantalum and others. Why people are involved in this trade without taking import the problem of ethics, for instance? Okay, it has been going for so long. People have been dying in this situation, and there are implications of states as well. A moment ago, the EU tried to sign a contract with Rwanda for trading this type of mineral, and it raised a lot of problems in this case because people are dying in this condition, and everyone is aware of this situation. So, to some extent, what are you? If I can ask you why the involvement of the international community is not so visible at this stage. We can see any input in this sense to influence this policy. Okay, so what is your opinion about that? That's my question.
Since we're talking about tantalum, I will answer. Well, again, it's personal perspective on it. The first thing is that there are some companies, such as Imerys, we are adhering to a code which is in the process of being creating, IRMA, where you are allowing people to come to your site at any point. So you can't, if you stop doing it, you're not adhering to IRMA. So you can say, okay, I'm getting my metal from a company which is aligning with that, meaning that some people are going to be on the field, see what is the biodiversity, if the mine can produce what they do, if they are paying people well, and so on. The specific problem of tantalum, in particular, is that it's a heavy mineral, the concentrate. It's very easy to concentrate by yourself, so it's one of the easiest one to get with artisanal mining. It's very difficult to do artisanal copper mining because the amount of copper is very low. Concentrating copper is very difficult. But concentrating colobotantalite, coltan, easy. I can do it. I take some spirals and shaking tables. CapEx very low, OpEx very low. You just dig it up. So it's easy. The thing is that a lot of people, when I'm talking about that, even people which are in the French administration, they don't realize that. It's a small market on the side. Sometimes you have some articles saying it's not normal and so on, artisanal mining and what is happening, people dying. And you have an outrage, but it's fading down afterwards. I think, honestly, in my opinion, the way to go is to allow people to go on the site, physically going there, and realizing that Rwanda may have one mine producing tantalum, but not 30. And that RDC is still doing tantalum production, and you see going through RDC Rwanda border a lot of trucks with tantalum concentrate in it. But if you don't allow people to go on the site, or if you don't forbid people to buy from companies which are not allowing that, it will go on. I'm optimistic, to be honest. I'm pessimistic on can we control and stuff, but on the production side, more and more companies are willing, and products like car makers and probably others, they want to go this way to ensure that the products are coming from legit business, which are auditable. But it will take a lot of time, for sure. In particular, it will take more time the smaller the market is. And tantalum is 2,000 ton market per year, so it's very small. So it will take more time. But it's I mean, when I discovered that, I was not part of that, I discovered this I was disgusted. This market is a market of whatever. I mean, okay, I don't want to say mean words, but when you are lying, cheating, and sometimes killing people, that's the reality of half the tantalum market in the world. Clear. But, okay. And I'm saying that, so I'm not hiding anything. Well, I'm not part of killing anyone, for sure, but nevertheless, I try to alert people to this kind of stuff happening, and it probably happens to other small metals and so on everywhere.
Thank you, Grégoire. Maybe a last question for you that we received online for you, Bin. So the question is, for the last conference, Cobalt conference in New York, the American Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy and Environment accused China, CMOC, the world's leading cobalt producer, to actively contributing to the decline in cobalt prices in the world market. The question for you, should we fear a geo-economic war between both countries? And by extension, how can we ensure a balance between the two powers in the critical minerals supply chain? You have 2 hours. No, sorry.
Yes, it's a hard question. But from my point of view, I think China and the US now intervened so much. So that's why China and the US can't separate with each other. They will still depend on each other. Although we have lots of battlefields, but which also means we have more chance to go back to the negotiating table. Because each one have, for example, US has chips, China has rare earths. So China, because just last month, both leaders have met each other in the Asia-Pacific meetings. I think that's a very good signal. Although we have lots of battle with each other, but I think now each time we can still move forward. Now each side knows, okay, you have the what I really need. So that's why you still need depend on each other. So I think for Trump, I think they know that, but because especially due to the starting from last year, like China used the rare earths as a tools to combat US, right? I think that's really worked. As far as I know, I know that's worked in some part way. So that's why they won't go back to the negotiation tables. So I think China, US, for sure, they will not go to the war, like geopolitical, like yeah, for sure they will still have a competition, for sure, a very fierce competition, but I think they have limits. Because both leaders will contact each other, I think, frequently. Actually, I can tell you one story. Sorry, I can probably say too much. In 2020, because US and China has a worst situation at that time, because also due to COVID, no any contacts between the government. So that's really dangerous, because you don't know what others think about. So that's, I think, the worst situation. And also climate actually play very important roles, because John Kerry was the climate envoy at that time, because John Kerry has a very good relation with Mr. Xie Zhenhua. He is my boss, actually. He's the founding president of this institute. So Xie Zhenhua wants to have a second track dialogue with US counterparts. So starting that time, like John Kerry and Mr. Xie Zhenhua has frequently talks, I think once in 2 weeks. I also participated a lot, so that's why I really benefit from their talking about. So they meet first, then they make the conditions for the president to meet. So that's why that period is really bad for the two countries, because no communication at all. But so that's why I think now it's not that worse. I think the worst period already passed. That's my opinion. As long as you can talk to each other and communicate. Also for our institute, now we have a cooperation with, I just talked to many experts here. We have cooperation with Stanford, with Chicago, with Kennedy School in Harvard, with Princeton universities, and Columbia universities. We have so many dialogue with each other. I think that's really important. The same for us with EU. Because you just also mentioned a very good point. Now, I think the last month, the first time probably EU have a trade deficit with China, right? Yes, I think probably that's the history in this period, because China's catching up in technology. I think that's very important, because I think in the past few years, EU really enjoyed a good life. You depends a lot on US technology, and also cheap energy from Russia, right? So that's why you are too dependent on other big economies. So that's why you begin to feel the pain. I think that's not bad because, like, so I came to Germany so many times in this year. I take also 20 students to Munich Tech. So we exchange a lot. So the Germany lots of experts told me now I think this thing is the time to look to China. Not like 30 years ago we go to Europe to learn from US, learn from Germany, from Europe. I think that's the time. Probably you need to feel the pain. Then you can, like, Rick always say, okay, we should cheer up and motivate it, right? I think that's not best thing. But as long as we still continue to talk to each other, but I think China and EU really missed the chance just before the Ukraine and the Russia crisis. I think that's because China chose to go to the Russia. But I think we really missed the chance that EU and China can go back again. But I think probably this will be another chance because, US retreat from the climate negotiations. So EU takes the priority of climate change, right? The same for China. So we still have laws implement to each other. So that's why we have dialogue with the EU Commission since starting year. Once in 2 months, we'll go to Brussels, and also they will come to Beijing. So I think it's really good because we really benefit from the dialogue between each other. So each time we'll choose different topics. So this may really make we understand what we are doing and what we want to do and what we want from each other. So I think things are not that bad. Even the same with US too. I think China will. I don't think we'll go to a political war. I don't think so. Because Trump will not like the war too. Okay, I stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's time to leave the floor for the final remark for the conclusion. Maybe Patrick, Rabat. Thank you again. Thanks.
So I'm going to try to be very efficient. I'm speaking under the control of Rick and Chris. So thank you very much to all for having contributed, all the panelists, all the speakers. And I'll just say a word about the next step for the review. So we are going to have a very rigorous process when the submission of the full first draft will be made, and they should be made before December 6th. So before December 6th, remember to submit your first full draft. Then we will ask many of you to also referee each other, so everyone has the right incentive to submit their review quickly and get the paper through. But of course, we are making no guarantee of publication. It will be a very selective process, as Rick likes to remind me. So thank you very much again, and for having made the trip and having been so engaged, and wishing you all a very safe trip home. And now it's my time to give the mic to my good friend Patrick. And
thank you, Arba. Thank you. Very briefly, because I know that many of you have departure commitments to come back home. First of all, thanks a lot to the organizers, Rabat, Rick, and Chris. It's a successful event in my view, a very successful event in my view. And there was you have a lot of work again, but the previous selection of the papers was, in my view, excellent, and it was very interesting to know. I was not able to follow all the session, but may I hope that now these critical papers you prepare will be now no longer critical, because they will be disseminated in the north and in the south. And I say that because it's a goal of the FERDI, CERDI, and the PCDI, the Paul Clermontois, to have research more and more located in the south. It's another way to say that this paper, this research, should not be longer critical. And I think I was struck during these sessions by the fact that there was a lot of discussion about what is critical, the criticality, but at the same time, most of the papers were not fully dedicated to the critical minerals, but also dedicated to the raw materials as a whole. And I think that's very interesting because the critical materials and the thinking about the criticality is also another way to consider all the minerals, and because these problems may be more and more applied to other minerals than the critical ones or those which are considered. Let's take your very interesting discussion on the sovereign funds. It was not specially on critical, it was on raw materials. And we can say that for several of the papers. And I think it's at the same time an indication for the way we can move ahead to better, to be deeper on the thinking on what is critical and what is not, and how this thinking about critical minerals could be extended to other raw materials likely to become tomorrow again critical. So thank you very much for this wonderful, stimulating, good wishes for the new special event, special issue of the Oxford Review, and thanks to all of you. And I may say that it will be a very good input for us to move ahead in the direction with the support of all of you. Thank you very much.
And I think, Bruno, do you wanted to say a word? Or? Yeah. No, please. Use the mic.
Patrick already did it. First of all, to thank you.
Introduce yourself also.
Oh, okay. So my name is Bruno Cabriac. I'm the managing director of FERDI. I try to assist Patrick. And just to complete what he has said, thank you very much, Rabat. It was a very big honor for FERDI and for CERDI also to welcome the conference. And thanks a lot for Chris and Rick and for the Oxford Economic Policy Review. And I want to extend the thanks of FERDI to the team, to Bulbul, Alou, Audrey-Anne. I don't see Audrey-Anne there. Fabienne, which is behind who is behind the door. And thank you all to have come to Clermont. I'm also a Clermont lover, even if I am not from Clermont. So thanks a lot, Rabat, again, because without you, it wouldn't have been possible.
We're all next month again.